Ron McAndrews is a former warden at Florida State Prison. I have a couple of histories on him, but I will keep it short. He's witnessed executions of inmates including John Earl Bush, John Mills Jr., and Pedro Medea. For several years, Ron has worked in the prison and jail consultant, as well as an expert. He comes, actually, there's no point in my telling you, because he's going to tell you his life story himself, so I'll leave it to that. But I promise you, you won't be disappointed. Ladies and gentlemen, Ron McAndrews.
Back on? Yep. Thank you very much. This is, it's a real opportunity for me. In fact, it's therapeutic for me to come and tell you my story. And the story I'm going to tell you is about a little boy from North Carolina who grew up in a rural area, raised by grandparents who supported the death penalty. And from there we go to how does a person actually support the death penalty? Why does another person not support the death penalty? Take away all those who've been real close to it or had a family member that was executed or something like that, and just take your average John Does from around this country and say, why does a guy across the street hate the death penalty and I'm so strongly for it? I'm going to tell you how that happens. In this little farmhouse I grew up in, we had two Bibles. We had the New Testament. We had the Old Testament. On Saturday nights we'd sit in front of the fireplace, and before the Grand Ole Opry came on the radio, we'd read Scripture or Bible stories. And an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was often quoted from the Old Testament. And it was explained to kids like myself. What does that mean? Somebody's going to take my tooth out if they lose a tooth? Well, that's how it goes. So you grow up with it. And in my case, there in that little area of Gaston County, North Carolina, I walked right into adulthood supporting the death penalty without any question. It was just ingrained into my mind. It was there. It was as much as loving my grandparents or respecting the flag or knowing my way to school. It was just there because it had been planted there as a child. And the seed grew. United States Air Force, straight out of high school, shipped overseas, landed in France, married a French woman, had a French baby, learned the French language, went to work for a French company, and 20 years later wound up back in the United States, jobless, and still by this time having a son that's still in high school. I needed to make a living. I was living down in South Florida in an area called Homestead. I had tried everything. My work with this European firm was in French fragrances and luxury products that are sold in duty-free shops. I spent a great deal of those years in South Vietnam selling Joy perfume and gold cigarette lighters and things like that to the Army Air Force Exchange Service. Nobody needed a perfume salesman down around Miami. I couldn't find work. I was running out of my reserves. I had purchased a couple of houses with my money that was left over from the company, and I was going to draw the rent from one and live in another and live happily ever after and not have to worry about anything. And they started calling me, telling me the hot water heater had blown up, the air conditioner doesn't work anymore, there's mildew in this house. I realized I was not born to be a landlord because I don't know how to fix a broken coat hanger. I was desperate for a job. I'd filled out applications all over Dade County. I'd gone down to Monroe County. Someone said to me, "Ron, why don't you go down to the prison? I hear they're desperate for help." Never been to a prison, but I drove down to Dade Correctional, and I filled out an application there at 10 o'clock in the morning, or at least I went into the personnel office. And when I told the lady there that I wanted an application for a guard, she literally hollered down the hallway to Mr. Jackson. She said, "Mr. Jackson, we have a CO applicant." He came out of his office and up the hallway, shook my hand, sat me down at a table, wanted to know if I wanted any coffee. I said, "Wow, all the other places I've applied for jobs, they didn't even offer me a seat, let alone a cup of coffee. I might just get a job here." And he says, "You're going to have to take a test." And he said, "There's 60 questions. You have an hour to do it. And you got to pass the test in order to be a correctional officer." Okay? Well, I sat down at the table, and it was that little where you color in the little circles. And he was standing over my back, and as I would start to color in a circle, he'd say, "Uh-huh." Go to the next one. Uh-huh. I got a perfect score. I aced that thing. And I was taken inside the actual gates of the prison after this and down a hallway to a little cooking school they had there at Dade. And the administrative lieutenant came out and introduced himself and invited me to lunch. He said, "The inmates cook lunch for the staff here. It's a cooking school, and they charge us 35 cents for lunch." And he said, it's not all that bad. So we had liver and onions, wasn't bad at all. And in the middle of lunch, he said, "We're going to have to eat up." He said, "because you're going to have to go someplace and cut that ponytail off and shave the beard. And if you're going to be back to work here at 4 o'clock this afternoon." I said, "This afternoon? Do I have a job?" "Yeah, you got a job. You just got to be back here and you got to cut the ponytail off." And so I ran off to the barber shop. They gave me a dirty uniform. I threw that in the washing machine on the way to the barber shop and had my beard and ponytail removed. And I had to go to Kmart and buy a military belt and a pair of black shoes. But I made it back just at 4 o'clock. And I went through the same place. In the meantime, they had taken my photograph before I left, and they had a name tag waiting for me at the personnel office. Well, I was starting to feel pretty proud. I put that on. I had this little uniform. It doesn't fit me very well, but I at least looked like the other people who were working there. I went into the visiting park where all the officers were assembling, and I just sort of stood around because I was definitely out of my environment. Nobody came up and introduced themselves to me. And I said, "They're waiting because they told me the lieutenant would be lining us up for an inspection." Well, a man in a white shirt came out. He was wearing lieutenant bars, and he did line us up and came by and inspected us. And I kept waiting for him to say, "This is our new employee, Ron McAndrew. Let's all give him a hand." And I'd worked for a French company for many years. We always flew first class. We stayed in the best hotels. When we saw each other, we embraced. Yeah, men kiss each other in France. And we're shaking hands all day long. We're very courteous to each other. And I'm suddenly in a group of people that could give a flip less if I'm there or not. And I'm not even being introduced as a new employee. Well, he chewed everybody out there, tell them how sorry they were, and you got to start doing more of this and less of that, showing up on time, and none of this leaving early anymore. I said, "Wow, man, this is a sorry place, but I really need this job." Well, when everybody broke up, they all went out the doors onto the compound. Well, I sort of followed the group, and one of the officers finally looked at me and said, "You don't know where to go, do you?" I said, "No," because they'd called my name and they said A dormitory. He said, "That's your dorm right there, first one on the left." So I went down to the door and I tried it and it was locked. Looked inside, and I could see an officer behind a desk, and he's sitting there with his finger like this, and he's right in front of me, and I've waved at him several times, doesn't wave back. I figured maybe he can't see me through this window, so I knocked, and he gave me the bird. He was not moving for that desk for some reason, and he kept looking at his watch. And finally he got up and he opened the door and he threw me this big ring of keys and he said, "There you go, sucker." I said, "I don't like this place. I don't like it at all." I found out later that he had been accused of going home early and leaving his place unsupervised, and he was going to make sure that he didn't get written up again for going home early. I didn't know that at the time. I walk into the office. There's nobody in this building. It's quiet. You can hear a pin drop. And I said, "This is the training building. They're going to come here and train me. That's why they put me in an empty building. That lieutenant, after he gets things squared away, he's going to be down here and teach me what to do." Nope. I sit around there. I sort of peeked in the desk. Some blank forms, pencil, telephone on the desk, and that was it, and me. And then suddenly I was startled because there was an inmate that had just poked his head around the corner, and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, boss." He said, "You gonna count?" I said, "Count what?" He said, "You're new." I said, "Yeah, come on, I'll show you what to do." My trainer had arrived. And he did, in fact, take me around the dormitory, took a ball pen and drew a cross on my hand. He said, "You have 4 quads. You write the numbers in on those on your hand. When you get back to the phone, you add them up and you call extension 131 and tell them how many inmates you have." And so I did. He went around the dorm. He said, "Be sure and count me." I did. We got back to my little office, and he says, "Give him a call." I called, and when I called the control room, told him I had 131 inmates, or 151, whatever it was, the guy on the phone said, "What in the hell took you so long?" I'm starting to like this place less and less by the minute, but I truly need a job. I need a paycheck. I need health insurance. I'm in a bad way. I've got a broken down house that's rented. The people won't pay me the rent because I can't afford to fix things that are wrong with the house. I'm going to lose that house before it's over with. And I'm in sad shape. So they called back, and the guy said, "Count's clear." The inmate's still standing there. He said, "Did they say the count was clear?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "That means we go to chow." I said, "What's that?" He says, "We're the honor dorm. We eat first." I said, "Well, what do we do?" He says, "You open the door and holler chow time." So I got the keys and opened the front door and said, "Chow time." Everybody flooded out. And within just a few minutes, my phone is ringing. I hear somebody cussing on the end of the line, and a lieutenant saying, "F it, I'll just come down there and talk to you." So the lieutenant came down and chewed me out royally for turning the inmates loose. He said, "Who told you to do that?" I said, "Well, the inmate told me." He said, "The inmate told you? That's when you start taking orders from an inmate." I said, "Well, I really didn't know what." "I don't give a crap. Anybody with half a brain would have known you don't do something like that." Boy, I really don't like this job now. And I'm not used to working around people like this. And nobody has shook my hand. Nobody certainly didn't kiss me. And I'm feeling very uncomfortable in this chain gang-like setting. I was almost ready to quit. Later on, during the night, there was a second lieutenant on duty, His name was Rick Stanley. Rick and I are very good friends today. He came down and he said, I hear you're having a rough time. I said, you don't know the half of it. So he said, let me tell you some of the ground rules. He said, I realize you're new. He said, somebody should have told you these things. He said, you never worked in a prison before? I said, no, sir. So he sat there and he was really very kind. Gave me a whole different feeling about where I was. There was at least one gentleman in this group, somebody with a little savoir-faire and a little bit of heart. So I listened to Rick, learned from him. And it was because of him that I actually came back to work the next day and the next day. And I still didn't like this job. And this, in my mind, this is a place where I am so temporarily here. I am just barely here. There's got to be something better for me. If I have to sell cars in Kendall or Miami, I'll go up there and sell cars. I'll learn how to sell cars. I'll do this, I'll do that, but I'm not going to work in this joint. I don't even like the way it smells. Dormitories don't smell so good. But somehow a month or 2 months, or maybe it was 3 months, had passed. And I don't know what was happening, but I suddenly realized that we were the honor dorm. I was effective at this business. I was pretty darn good at it. I'd only been there 3 months, and people were calling me up on the phone and asking me how to do things. I was reading the rules and regulations. They let me take Chapter 33 home. Man, I thought I had the Holy Grail. The way they told me, don't lose that. And I found myself sliding out of bed and hitting the floor running. And after about 4 or 5 months, I'm walking down the compound one day, and there's a 2-story building there, the administration building that faces the compound. And the warden's office has windows from the ceiling to the floor. And I'd see him standing up there a lot, like this. Always had a toothpick in his mouth. Guy named Bill Rouse, Avon Park boy. And I said, I want his job. If I had his job, this would be a lot better place to work. People would shake hands. People would say hello to each other. People would treat people like people. It would be a different climate. So I asked for an appointment to see the warden. Boy, that caused a stir. Finally got called to the major's office, and why do you want to see the warden? I said, well, Major, I just want to get a little career guidance. I'll give you all the career guidance you need. He wasn't happy about it. I said, I know you would. And I said, no, I appreciate that, but he's the top dog, and I'd just like to meet him and talk to him about it. I only need a few minutes. Another 2 weeks go by, and he calls me and he says, all right, he said, I got you an appointment up there, but it's for 15 minutes. Because he's already told me he's in a hurry, and he's got to get home. He just got married again. He has a young bride waiting on him at home. And don't be messing around with the man's time. And now I want you to report back to me and tell me what you told him. Yes, sir. So I hustle on up there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I walked into Mr. Rouse's office, and I could tell he had perused my personnel file. I saw my photograph upside down on his desk. And he had that toothpick in his mouth. He was one of the most South Florida boys that could talk to you without opening his mouth. What can I do for you, Mr. McAndrew? I said, I'd like to have your job. Boy, he pulled that toothpick out of his mouth then. In fact, he stood up and wanted to know how in the hell I was going to do that. I said, it's very simple, sir. I'm going to get you promoted, then I'm coming after your job. But I'm here to see if you'll tell me how to do it. You've already done it. Your job is what I want. I would like for you to tell me the shortest distance between where I'm standing right now and that chair behind you. Well, he thought for a second, and then he grinned. He said, sit down. He said, I ain't got much time. I got to get home. I got a new wife. She's cooking special. He had just transferred down from Lake Correctional, where he had met his bride, Barbara, wonderful lady. And we started talking. I took a pad and a pencil with me. And I finally told him, I said, what's your advice? I said, you've looked at my file. You know what I have and don't have in terms of assets. He said, well, first thing you need to do, Mr. McAndrew, is go back to school. Get yourself a degree in criminal justice administration. So the second thing is learn how to be political without becoming a politician. There's a difference. I didn't really know what he meant right then, but I learned later on. There is a difference. And he went on down the list, some wonderful advice like never kick ass and take names. That's the worst thing you can ever get involved in. Don't ever get sucked into a goon squad. Don't be afraid to enforce and uphold the Constitution of Florida. In other words, if somebody's breaking the law, know about it, do about it. Says we have too many people in this department that see no evil, speak no evil, and hear no evil. Doing 8 and hitting the gate. Well, I had about a dozen items on my list. He had had 2 or 3 phone calls while we were there, and he had begged off each time, I'll be there in a few minutes. And to make this story a little bit shorter, we started at 4 o'clock. At 6:30, the 2 of us walked downstairs from his office across the parking lot to the double-wide mobile home that he and his wife lived in, and I had dinner with him. He lives up just north of Chattahoochee today. He's a retired regional director, and with his wife, Barbara. And he fishes all day, every day. He's a great guy. I took his advice. I did everything on the list as hard as I could, as quickly as I could. And when a position for sergeant opened up, I went after it. I transferred. He told me, be mobile. He said, if you think you're going to sit at one place for your entire career and get promoted every time you feel you should get promoted, it's not going to happen. You've got to find new subordinates. It's not a good thing to be supervising your buddies. It's a difficult thing to do. Move around for promotional opportunities. I worked in 9 prisons in Florida. Correctional officer, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, investigator, inspector, major, skipped over colonel, and was appointed as a deputy warden, opening up what was called Orange Correctional Institution in Orlando in 1988. 10 years after I'd started, I could now see my goal. I was a brand new deputy warden, and my boss was a brand new warden, Dennis O'Neill, another wonderful personality that stepped into my life, a person with great guidance. And then in 1992, I was appointed as a brand new warden to open yet another brand new correctional institution in Weewahitchka, Florida, Gulf Correctional Institution. That was a real challenge, hiring 750 new staff out in a rural area. taking on 1,000 inmates in the first 90 days. Brand new correctional officers, most of them straight out of the academy. But it turned out to be a really good institution at that time, and we had some really fine people working there. And in 1996, I'd been there 4.5 years, and I heard about these wardens getting moved around the state. I told my wife, who just graduated from registered nursing school in Panama City, we're going to get transferred any minute. We're way over the 4-year limit. In those days, anytime after 3 years, you were up for grabs if they needed to move a warden someplace. And she said, well, what's open? I said, well, there's 2 places right now. One's Hendry, and the other one is Florida State Prison over by Stark. She said, where is Hendry? And I tried to tell her someplace down southwest Florida between Lake Okeechobee and Charlotte County. She said, well, where's the nearest mall? And when I told her that it was 60 or 70 miles, she said, why don't you put in for that one in Stark? Because they have the Oaks Mall in Gainesville, and I know that can't be too far. My wife is a shopper. So I did. I put in for it, and I had no idea if I'd get it or not. But I got a call from another wonderful person who also stepped into my life and was very helpful to me during my career. Saved my fanny so many times. It was Harry K. Singletary, Jr. And Mr. Singletary said to me, Ron, he says, I want to send you to Florida State Prison. I said, yes, sir, I'm ready. He said, I just have one really important question to ask you. And he says, I need an immediate answer, and I need it right now because I want you at Florida State Prison this coming Monday. That Lynn's going to have to do the packing and follow you later on. And I said, yes, sir. He says, are you going to have any problems whatsoever in carrying out executions? No, sir. My answer was instant, without reflection. That's the same answer I would have given him when I was 10 years old. I grew up with that feeling that it was a just and honorable thing to do. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Well, that Monday, I sure enough showed up at Florida State Prison. Took a folding cot in the back of my truck, set it up over there at the warden's house. A great big old 1818 house. And started to work. I was advised that Governor Childs had a stack of warrants on his desk. He was very anxious to start signing them, and he wanted to crank up executions, and he wanted to catch up with Texas, is basically what I was told. And my response was, bring it on. I'm ready. I had the death team there training me every day. We spent 4 or 5 hours a day going through mock executions. We actually cranked up the generators. Instead of having a human body that we connected the electrodes to, we'd drop them into a saline solution, a big bucket of water with salt. We had a mock executioner that would turn the knob, send the electricity. It would immediately boil the water with 24,000 volts, 13 amps. I was feeling very comfortable about my new assignment and very just. And then I got a warrant. And it was just a matter of a few days later I got this warrant. I went over to the cell, and suddenly I don't know if I realized it right then. I did later. That this was no longer just a black bordered piece of paper. This was no longer just dialogue between myself and Mr. Singletary or Louis Vargas or the governor's office or the governor himself. Governor Charles called me a number of times telling me, make it pretty. Don't screw this up. We had one of them fires down there, you know. Can't do that again. Make it pretty, Ron. Yes, sir. We're practicing every day. I have a grip on this, Governor. Got to make it work good. Them goddamn newspapers, they'll put you in the funny papers before you know it. And so then I suddenly realized that this was not just a piece of paper. I had this human being that I've actually touched his arm, is bringing him out of a cell, and I'm talking to him all the way downstairs, telling him why I'm moving him off the row and down to a holding cell at the death chamber. And when I got down there, I went into the cell, read him the death warrant the first time. You got to read it twice. Once when you're announcing his warrant, and once the morning of the execution. Well, for the next 20 days that went by, I started having some strange things happen. After he's been down there a day or two, I get a call on radio. Somebody says, you've got a call from your secretary. And I picked up the phone and I said, what's going on? She said, there's some people in your outer office that want to see you. And I had an open door policy I'd always had. I felt that I owed my entire paycheck to the citizens of Florida, and if they wanted to see the warden, all they had to do was come to my office. I said, who is it? Well, I was really busy with all this mess. And she said, it's the family. I said, what family? Of the condemned, because apparently they were right in front of her and could hear her. I said, okay. All the way down that quarter of a mile you've got to walk to go from one end of that building to the other. I'm wondering, oh God, I've got to go talk to his family? It's not supposed to be part of this. I told her on the phone, put them inside my office, make them comfortable. I had a little refrigerator in there with bottled water and Cokes and stuff. I went into the office and asked them if I could get them anything. It was an elderly black lady with her two daughters. She was very old. And the two daughters were sisters of the condemned. And I took a seat and I said, what can I do to help you folks? I was feeling very uncomfortable. We're about 100 yards from this lady's son who's in a death cell, and in about 10, 12 days we're going to put him to death. She said, well, we just never realized this was going to really happen. He's been here 17 years. We just didn't think it would happen. They haven't been doing this sort of thing. And we actually thought, there might come a time that those appeals and things, that he might come home. And I said, please understand that I have a horrible duty to carry out here. And I know that your position is a great deal more difficult than mine. But I'll do what I can for you folks throughout this ordeal. I'll bend rules, I'll break rules, I'll do whatever's necessary to allow you visits. If your son has an outside religious representative. I'll see to it that that person is allowed to come and worship with him. I'll do everything I possibly can. If you have a message for him today, I'll be glad to take it to him. And I found myself suddenly realizing that there's a whole human side to this killing business that I'm suddenly in. And that the victims are not just the ones that died 17 years earlier, but I got 3 of them sitting in my office. And they're hurting. And they haven't hurt anybody. They just happen to have a son or brother who allegedly committed a horrible crime. I spent a little bit of time with them. The mother then said something that stuck with me. I've dreamed about it 1,000 times. It'll never leave my mind for a second. But when they finally stood up and they were getting ready to leave, she had a cane in one hand and a daughter under the other arm. And she said, Warden, I just want to know one thing. You said we was going to maybe get to visit with him before, you know. But am I going to be able to hug my baby one more time before y'all put him down? You have that experience, and if you have a child of your own, and I do, you can't help but stop and reflect a little bit upon what you're doing, why you're doing it. Is it necessary? I carried out the execution. Went down there that morning after he had had his last chance to hug his mama. We got his mother and his 2 sisters and another relative out of the building and made sure they were in a car and down the road so that the media wouldn't crawl all over them. We went down to his cell, and I sat down on the cell next to him. Of course, he was in leg irons and belly chains and handcuffs. And, the officers have already shaved his right leg and his entire head. They have him all prepped for this ceremonial killing. And I sat down on a bunk next to him, and I had that death warrant. And I told him, I said, listen, I said, I wish I could get around this. But I said, it's a requirement. The law requires me to read this to you before your execution. And it's long. And they actually do put a black border around this death warrant. They want to make it as sordid as it can possibly be. In the meantime, I can visualize some little politician up in Tallahassee just pounding his chest. And I start reading the death warrant. It's very wordy. Has some legal phraseology and terminologies and words that are difficult to pronounce. And the inmate noticed that I was sort of stumbling over myself in trying to read him this warrant. And with all this stuff wrapped around him, what have you, he elbowed me a little bit with his left elbow, and he said, hey, boss, he said, it's all right. I'm ready. He's trying to help me. We took him into the death chamber. At that time, we were still using the electric chair. And it's very quick when you get in there. Curtains are drawn. You can't let the public see anything that might go wrong. You hide as much as you can until the last minute. Because 13 of those witnesses are from the media, national, international, and 13 are citizens. And you strap him in very quickly, and then you open the curtains. Warden goes to the phone. The governor's already on the phone and says to the governor, do we have any stays, Governor? And he's required to tell me twice, there are no stays, there are no stays. Thank you, Governor. We'll carry out the execution. Thank you, Warden. And at that point, we put the microphone up to the condemned's mouth and ask him if he has any last words. And after he does give his last words, a very stiff leather mask is squeezed over the front of his face. It actually breaks the tissue in his nose. Blood runs down inside of that mask that you'll never see because the bottom of the mask is filled with tissue to catch it. But it's so tight, and it's put that way so that if he could, in fact, scream, no one would ever hear it. Very few people know that. And then a hood, a helmet, copper helmet is strapped around all of this. The warden then has a doctor standing to his right. He has the colonel and the deputy warden for operations on the other side of this little tiny room. The executioner and the electrician are behind a little wall where nobody can see the executioner. And the warden gives the secret signal after they've put all this apparatus together to start the electrocution. The inmate's then put to death. After that, the witnesses, when the doctor pronounces the inmate dead and the warden tells the governor what time he was pronounced dead, you hang up the phones, you get rid of the witnesses. That all takes just a few seconds. The inmate is unstrapped, and they immediately have a lot of wet towels to wipe up all the blood that's coming from his face, and put it in a red bag, send it down to medical, and to have the coroner or the local funeral home pick up the body in a body bag and drive him off the compound. Well, I went back to my van outside the building, and it was customary at that time for the warden to take the entire execution team, which all of them together, about a dozen or so guys, down to one of the restaurants in town for breakfast, because we've been up since 2 o'clock in the morning. The executions were at 7 a.m. in those days. It'd be over, and by 8:30, 8:45, you'd be downtown. And we went into Shoney's. These 12 guys are all, well, 11 of them are in, 10 of them are in uniform. The maintenance superintendent and myself are in civilian clothes. The warden wears a large badge, so everybody in town knew who we were and what we had just done. Stark is a prison town. It's surrounded by 8 prisons. If you don't work at a prison, your wife does. If your wife doesn't, your parents do. Somebody in your family works at the prison. If nobody in the family works at the prison, then you have a business that makes its living off of prison employees. It's a prison town. We were actually getting high signs from people. Yeah! And little things like, psst. We went to the back of the restaurant. They had a place blocked off for us back there, and everybody elected to do the buffet, and we got up and got our plates, and I put some grits and eggs on my plate and sat down, and I was having some strange feelings all of a sudden. I'm sitting with the deputy warden for operations and the colonel. And I could see people in the restaurant were staring at us. I could not put one bite of those grits and eggs in my mouth. And I didn't know why, but I knew something was happening to me. Looked over across the way behind the colonel, and this lady had turned her head around and locked eyes with me. And I recognized her as Miss Carey, the attorney from Gainesville, who had represented this inmate for more than 15 years. She was his defense attorney. She knew him as well as his family did. She had a sickening look on her face, and I suddenly realized the way I was feeling was the way she looked. I realized that I was in a restaurant celebrating the killing of another human being. And a lot of people in there thought it was fun. I'm starting to get a bad taste. Second execution, pretty much the same deal. The third execution was Pedro Medina. He was a Marielito Cuban. Came over 1981, I believe, was the boat lift in Cuba. Castro let all of his prisoners out of prison, put them on boats owned by Cuban Americans, and sent them to Miami. Pedro had grown up on the streets, literally on the streets as a little boy, working in those kid gangs where they begged money in cups all day long from the tourists. They would come together at night and put all their money in one little pot, see if they could buy enough bread and maybe a slice of cheese to get by till the next day. And then suddenly he's in Miami, and the first thing we do is give him $1,000 cash, new clothes, and a plastic card that represents $2,000. All he has to do is do like that. And he has a temporary ID card. Man, this is the richest he ever dreamed of being in his life. He literally has thousands of dollars in his pocket. We made a lot of mistakes in those days in the way we handled things. That was certainly a mistake. But Pedro, and I read all of his files as I did from the others, it appeared that he really had committed this horrible crime. When the execution was about to start and the electrician reached down into the saline solution, he comes up with this natural sponge. The correct method is squeeze it a little bit so that you squeeze about half of the water out of it and put the rest on the top of his head, and then clamp the helmet down. I saw the hand squeeze the sponge tightly, and I immediately questioned the electrician. This man had worked on 30 executions. He knew a lot more about this business than I did. I said, "Carl, you leave enough solution in that sponge?" "Oh, yeah, boss, we're good. We're ready to go." Okay. Minutes later, seconds later, I give the signal. The electrical current passes to this man's head. There's a pop. All of us know what's happening when we touch something electrical and we hear a pop. It means something's wrong. When I heard that pop, I knew something was awry, but I didn't know what. And then suddenly a flame dips down out of the helmet and right up in front of my face. Because of the size of the room, the warden stands 3.5 feet from the electric chair. Another flame came down. Then black smoke starts billowing out from the helmet. And then a smell. And I had to go to a couple of airplane crashes when I was in the military and helped pick up body parts and what have you. Terrible job. Went and buried people at an earthquake in Agadir. one time, and it was awful. And so I knew what decaying or burning human flesh smelled like. But I had never smelled anything so putrid, so dirty, so disgusting as the man we were literally burning to death. Lawton Childs fired me twice that day and hired me back twice, thanks to Mr. Singletary. I told you not to let anything happen. They sent me, the governor called me about 4 or 5 days later when he got over his anger and said, listen, I've been on the phone with Governor Bush down in Texas, and we've made arrangements. He's going to sign some death warrants right fast, and it's going to be training for you. You're going to go down there, and he said, I don't want you to write a damn thing down. Anything you write down, they can ask for, and you got to give it to them. You memorize everything you see. You learn about all the chemicals. You learn about all the lines that are used, the table, the setup, everything. And you stay down there in Huntsville and work with these people. I made 4 or 5 trips to Huntsville, and I worked with the death team on 5 lethal injections. And I'm still saying I support the death penalty, but I'm feeling horribly uncomfortable about all kinds of things. Well, a year to the day after Pedro Medina's execution, my wife sat me down one night and she said, this can't go on. I said, this what? She said, you're not the same person you were when you came here to this place. You've changed. You don't like the change, and I know you don't. And I don't like the change. I want you to resign. She told me, you're a smart guy. You can do anything. I can get a job any place. I want you to quit. Get out of this business. It's killing you. I called Mr. Singletary, with whom I had developed a great deal of affection and love and a friendship. And I told him, I said, Mr. Singletary, I need a favor. He said, you name it. I said, please get me out of this place. Something going on down there, Ron? I said, yes, sir. Lots of stuff. I said, I don't like these executions anymore. And I said, I have goon squads here that are beating inmates half to death every night of the week. I said, I can have a witness who sees something happen, and they'll show up with a dozen affidavits to the contrary half hour later. So this is a snake pit like you would never believe. Get me out of here, please. He said, all right, I'll call you back. And he did. He called back the same day. He said, I'm going to send you home. I said, what's that? He said, I'm going to send you back to Orlando. I'd helped open that institution, knew a lot of the people there, and I liked it because it was well managed. So I went back to Orlando. But these executions followed me. I never had much, respect is a bad word, but I never had much to do with psychologists or psychiatrists. I always thought these folks were for rich old ladies that didn't have anything better to do with their money. But my wife kept pressing me to go get some help. She said, you're not getting more than 2 hours sleep a night. You're having horrible nightmares all the time. And I did, finally. I'm treated by the VA. So I called my doctor at the VA and made an appointment, and I sat and talked to him a little bit about what I'm telling you today. And he said, because I'd already gone to a psychiatrist who had given me some pills, and I wouldn't take them because they made me feel strange. But he says, we have a staff member now, a psychologist, that actually has worked as the staff psychologist in a prison with people that were being executed in another state. I think you two have a lot in common. Will you just see her one time? I said, anything to make my wife happy. And I did. She's still my therapist to this day. The nightmares are not quite as bad as they used to be. These men don't come and sit on the edge of my bed as often as they used to. But when they do come now, I understand why at that point of leaving Stark, Florida, that I woke up one morning in Orlando and sat up in bed and said to myself, Ron McAndrew, there is no way on God's good earth that you will ever support the death penalty again. That was the end of it. That's my story. Thank you.